Hey guys, how's it going? Stoud Man coming back at you again today, and today we're going to be talking about, or picking up where I left off, I guess, talking about how after I watched The Lodger on Blu-ray, I immediately felt like, well, I need to go back and watch the original Universal movies because I want to go back and see if there's any merit to what I was saying about Dracula perhaps borrowing from The Lodger in some way. So I went to my shelf and I picked up the classic Universal Classic Monsters set that I have here. And I said, you know what? I'm going to watch all of these. Sure enough, I am indeed going to watch all of these. I have already begun to watch all of these, and by the end of the week you will see my review of all of these. But yeah, the first one here is, of course, Dracula, and I popped it into my new disc player, even though this is Region A. It plays all regions, so I figured, let's put that one in this one too. I'm going to probably just end up using this Blu-ray player for almost everything I watch. The PS4, PS3 take a while to boot up. This thing is almost instantaneous. The new region-free player I got, so yeah, that's nice. But anyways, as I was watching Dracula, I also decided to take a look at this little booklet here. The original House of Horror. This booklet comes with the set. And sure enough, this actually starts off by telling you about a bunch of the movies that Universal did before they got around to the whole classic monster movies that they became so well known for doing. And as I'm reading through this, I'm just like, wow, this is really cool information. They're talking about how, you know, there were some movies made, and they made some horror movies in like in 1913 and 1914, and in the 1920s they made a few others, but nothing that really caught on or became known for being like a major monster movie. You know what I mean? So as I'm reading this, I'm looking at all these names and looking at the dates and thinking, I bet you anything that these movies are available in the public domain. I think I'm going to go check that out. And sure enough, almost every single movie that's listed in here as a precursor to Universal Monster movies is available on archive.org in the public domain. So that's what I decided to do. I decided to go download those while I was watching Dracula. And when I finished Dracula, I decided to go ahead and go back and see all of the roots of Universal's monster movies. See how they became the House of Horror, so to speak. So yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I'm going to take you on that journey with me to explain why it was so much fun. Universal was one of the first studios to produce horror films. They were the first studio to tackle movies about the werewolf in 1913 and 1914, but these movies have sadly been lost to the annals of history and time. This is quite a tragedy, as at least one of these movies reportedly offered one of the most accurate depictions of the folktale legend that was ever set to film. Although this is unfortunate, we do still have access to one of Universal's most important works from that era, 1916's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's been exactly 100 years since this movie was introduced to audiences, and even today it is apparent that this was a monumental undertaking. I was taken aback when I saw the first shots underwater depicting real coral reefs. I wondered how they had managed to capture such footage in 1916. Upon further research, I discovered that this movie was indeed the first film ever shot underwater, which means that these scenes represent some of the first ever recorded footage of such locations. Much like the fantastical inventions discussed in Verne's novels, Universal managed to create a contraption that allowed them to record footage underwater, and this groundbreaking tale from only 45 years prior was covered with groundbreaking technology. Unfortunately, their attempts to recreate the tale for film were reportedly so expensive that there was no way they would ever turn a profit. Although 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea featured a lot of groundbreaking footage, it also featured the imperfect cinematography that was characteristic of its time. Filmmakers were still in the process of figuring out what did and did not work when it came to visual storytelling for movies. You have to remember that at this point in the industry, the artistry of telling a story through moving images was a fairly new concept. They were at most 15 to 20 years removed from some of the first films ever made, and most of the earliest works of the 1900s were short enough that very little thought was put into something such as shot selection or even acting. It wasn't until around the time that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was released that we began to see these kinds of efforts put into film. This continued on in the 15 years leading up to Dracula and Frankenstein with works such as 1923's Hunchback of Notre Dame, featuring Lon Chaney as Quasimodo. By the time this movie was released, they had been working on the art form for perhaps 10 years, with each filmmaker learning from one another as they all created the earliest forms of the visual art. The area where Universal's films really shined were their special effects, costumes, makeup, and set design. The makeup work for this movie improves vastly upon previous efforts from the studio, and Chaney still looks pretty darn good to this very day. This movie is also a lot easier to follow as filmmaking techniques were finally beginning to improve. In 1925, Chaney went on to play the Phantom of the Opera in Universal's first take on the story. That's right, the classic featured on the Blu-ray set is actually a remake. Even if you've never seen the film, something tells me you may be familiar with the face of Chaney when his mask is removed. It's one of those makeup jobs that has transcended the film itself and will be instantly recognizable even to those who have no idea where they've seen it before. The cinematography is also quite impressive, with several examples of excellent framing, playful moments with shadows, and even a few scenes in color. This is the point where the art behind the studio's horror films truly begins to take form. As the booklet describes, Universal could not yet make their movies talk, but their movies could make audiences scream. At this point, the studio was developing a reputation for their horror and science fiction films. This continued on with the likes of The Cat and the Canary in 1927 and The Man Who Laughs in 1928. The Cat and the Canary has a cool opening title sequence featuring a hand wiping away cobwebs to reveal the name of the film. It also includes a lot of really cool shots that prove the studio and their filmmakers were beginning to try some new and amazing things. This is a proper haunted house film, and there are more than a few moments that will remind you of Dracula. Of all the silent Universal horror films I've watched, this has to be one of the best. Released just a year later, The Man Who Laughs has all the hallmarks you will come to expect from a classic Universal film, except for the talking. Only a few years later, the studio would move on to the talkies and produce the horror flicks that would eventually become synonymous with the name Universal. So yeah, I mean, as you can see, there's actually a lot of stuff there that is really interesting, really worthy of note. Obviously, like one of the big things that made Universal such and put them in such a good place to be able to do the monster movies was that they had already been noted at that point for their really good sets, their really good movie sets, and their amazing makeup work. Lon Chaney did some really cool stuff in the 1920s for Universal, and Universal went on to do a bunch of really cool stuff when it came to special effects, makeup work, and sets in the Universal monster movies that everybody knows and loves in this particular set. So, yeah, I mean, watching through all those, I was just like taken aback, but because it starts off with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and that one's quite frankly not very good. It doesn't hold up as much. But you're watching this, you're thinking, this movie is 100 years old, and even it was groundbreaking in terms of the technology that they used. And then I went forward and watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I'm just noting how these sets are so freaking huge, and I'm noting how the Hunchback himself, Lon Chaney, playing the Hunchback, looks so good in that makeup. You can barely tell it's him because the makeup's so freaking good. And then I went forward to Phantom of the Opera, which quite frankly is so... I don't like. How can I say anything except for it's so good? It's a really good interpretation of the story, and I'll give you my thoughts on the remake. That's right, remake that is actually in this set when I get around to reviewing this set. But for now, let me just finish off by saying that Yeah, after that, I watched The Cat and the Canary and Man Who Laughs. Man Who Laughs, not really as much of a horror movie. There are horror elements to it, but it's not really as much of a horror movie. It's just like the special effects to it are pretty good, or the makeup effects and everything. And, you know, you really start to see how in that movie they're developing into a studio that knows how to make proper films, and the storytelling aspect of telling stories with moving images, they've got it down pat. They're really getting forward to it. If you watch The Man Who Laughs, it's readily apparent that this movie might as well have been a talkie. You know, at this point, they've gotten it down so fucking well that if they had the ability at the time to attach microphones in certain places, they probably it probably would have felt about the same way as watching it silent. I guess what I'm trying to say is that watching that silent film, it doesn't really feel like you're watching a silent film. It feels like you're watching a movie that could easily be a movie with dialogue had they the technology and the means at the time to do that. So, yeah, very cool. But I think my favorite among all those early ones, and the one that I highly recommend you guys check out, oddly enough, not Phantom of the Opera, not Man Who Laughs, not Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think the best one of all of those, the one that's like the most horrific, is actually The Cat and the Canary. That movie is so good. I think I found a new favorite with that one. That one is so good. It's engrossing. Like with The Man Who Laughs, it's another movie that they are really starting to perfect the storytelling aspect of movies and all that. And it's just so much fun to watch. Absolutely loved it. And it's like a perfect haunted house movie, too. I would say if you're going to watch House on Haunted Hill this year, or any other movie kind of like that, that you can easily pair that with Cat and the Canary here, and you will have a lot of fun. Because if Cat and the Canary didn't in some way inspire every haunted house movie that came after it, I don't know. I don't know how that would be possible, because it feels like every fucking haunted house movie. And being that it's one of the first that's kind of like that and sets up some of those cliches and all that stuff, and being that there's so much stuff going on in there that they're being kind of experimental with, I don't know. It just feels really special to me for some reason. Out of all the ones that I watched, that felt more special than the others. That felt more like a classic Universal monster movie to me than any other. And there wasn't even a monster in it per se. But it was a really cool movie, and I really enjoyed it. And I think I found a new favorite that I'm probably going to try and pick up at some point, either on DVD or Blu-ray, because, yeah, it was really good. And the copy that they currently have on archive.org is actually really high quality. So, yeah, I highly recommend watching that one out of all of them. If you want to watch any of the other ones that lead up to it, then I recommend Man Who Laughs, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Phantom of the Opera. If I had to recommend only two to watch, Phantom of the Opera and Cat and the Canary. Some people may disagree with me on that one, but yeah, those are two that I think would be great to watch just to understand how Universal became the House of Horror before you get into the actual, monster movies, so to speak. So yeah, that was a really cool experience. I had a lot of fun going back in time before the Universal monster movies to see where it all came from, to see where it all started. So, yeah. The only thing I'm sad about is that I really wish we could have seen those earlier werewolf movies, but apparently some of them have either been destroyed or are completely lost to time. So, yeah. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Either way, yeah, that was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to continue on with the Universal horror movies. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to get through here. We've got, let's see, we got Dracula in 1931. Same year, 1931, we got Frankenstein. Then we got The Mummy. I like The Mummy. We got The Invisible Man. Bride of Frankenstein. The Wolf Man. the Phantom of the Opera remake and Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's the final one on this set. And I'll talk more about those movies in the next video that I'm going to do here. Yeah, because I could go on and on and on and on and on right now, but that would defeat the purpose. You've already seen a lot of me talking about pre-classic monster stuff. I'm going to do an entirely different video about the Universal Classic Monsters and this particular set. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, you guys. Catch you later. Peace.